Welcome to the July Foresight Games meetup. We are very lucky to have Ian here today to walk us through his process of creating a risk game, and we're really keen to hear all the details that you're comfortable sharing about both the game and the process and the trade-offs and the impact that you're hoping it's going to have. So with that, Ian, please take it away. Introduce yourself
Awesome.
first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Randy. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to share this game and learn from others and kind of hear what folks' reactions are as they see the game assets and get a concept for what we're doing with the game. So yeah, my name's Ian Curtis. My background is international government relations and international business education is the best way to summarize it. And the reason I got into games and serious games was when I was in the GR world, the government relations world, I was really disappointed with the lack of understanding of the nuances and complexities and the long-term implications of all the decisions that business leaders were making and in the environments and of the environments that they were working in. And likewise, when I went over to the business side, I was sorry, and then on the government relations side, working with them was they just fundamentally didn't understand like the drive of the business side of just what are quarterly profits. What does it mean when you're trying to make a money and your fiduciary responsibility? When you talk to the policy side, people just fundamentally just don't understand how the business is driven, and that's why I went into business education was to understand that side of things. And so, anyways, the tool that I saw that could fix this was serious games. Was there needed to be a whole new framework that everybody could sit down within and work on a problem together, bring the different paradigms to the problem, but then learn a new language together through an experience. And that's really what got me into the games field and the long process of studying and researching and developing my own style. So that's what led me into this field. And then what I'm doing with Danny Crichton at Lux Capital is Riskgaming. And so Danny might have shared broadly what they're up to, but in all the games. But so what my game was initially was what does the China business environment look like? What is it like today to actually operate in China? And I leveraged my almost 6 years living in Beijing, working with chambers of commerce and so forth in Beijing to build this game out. And so that was the main focus of the game initially was what what is that experience like, and how do you get people to download like a deep sense of empathy for this environment that's critical, but everybody like jumps to really rapid assumptions on, oftentimes without ever having stepped into it. And so we developed this game, and it was over time that we said, okay, let's choose a real industry for it. I'd kind of kept it as initially as a kind of mid to high tech industry, just broadly speaking. Didn't really want to choose a single industry as we developed it out, and eventually we said, all right, let's land on the electrical vehicle industry. I think that's the most interesting one to engage, and everybody can relate to that, and everybody's watching that closely and so forth. And it fit for the model of the game that I'd already developed. So that's kind of the story of the game. And if it's cool with folks, I'll just kind of go through kind of what the assets look like, and let's get into it. So I will flip my camera around. Okay. So sorry again for the computer not working. So what I developed was there's every player playing the game has two player boards that they are using to leverage their own experience. The game is 6 players, three companies, two vice mayors, and a consultant who helps it all happen. And so each player board breaks it down into what actions the player can do. Everybody has their own unique set of actions that they're available to do in the middle of it. They have their buy on the left side, and then they have kind of their currency collection on the right side. And so this is a commercially driven game, economic decisions. Everybody's negotiating and deciding what currency they find the most valuable at that time in that scene, and they're trading the currencies back and forth. So here we have the president of U.S. General China. In no way so whatsoever affiliated with any other auto company that has the general word in their company name. And so in this case, the actions are, and in all the cases, the actions are spread out by the amount of time that each action requires. So each scene of the game is a quarter of the year. And based on the actions you want to take, your actions can take 1 month of time, it can take 0 months of time, 2 months of time, and so on and so forth. And so your actions are limited by the amount of time of the months or of the quarter that they take. And so your actions are always different transactions that you can do. What currencies do you want to give to who? So this is the public board, what anybody and everybody can see about your character. And then you have your own secret board. And these are just printables that you have in front of you during the game. But this is then your own secret board of what only you know or are keeping track of about yourself in the game. And so in this case, the president of US General can conduct research and development on their China business. They see how much currencies they gain every single round. In this case, they get information and capital. They can see what their multiplier is for their investments in internal combustion engines and electrical vehicles. And these are presets like market expectation returns for each scene of the game. And then they can keep track of what their market share is of their global markets around the game. And the reason that is a crux of the game is helping these people figure out, when you're operating in China, what are the global ramifications for your business? And so you're making all these investments in China and trying to decide, all right, do I want to invest in internal combustions, electrical vehicles, when, how, why, how, whatever. And then along the way, you're watching as, wait a minute, why is my global share of the auto industry dropping in the US or in the EU or wherever it might be? So if you, the other company that there is a German company, Autobauer, and then we have a Chinese company. So the Chinese company, for example, their secret page is a little bit different. They get a different type of information because they're a Chinese company. They gain Chinese information every scene. They also have some bonus conditions that only they know about that give them unique benefits either at the end of the game or throughout the game based on what transactions they achieve and so forth. And so there's an example of the hidden knowledge. The way that I developed it was you have your own little player board. And so I really wanted the game to have a physical feel and make sure that people were handling their things the whole time, kind of a sense of control of what they're doing in their own reality. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that there were the currencies that everybody gets and then their own player boards. So back to the currencies then is one of the key things was, so there's also mayors in the game. And the mayors are trying to get people to invest in their cities and grow the revenues for the cities. But one of the key currencies that they're getting is social capital every single scene of the game. And so most of their special rules are all about social capital, not necessarily about the tax revenues that they gain, though there's like a whole tax revenue kind of calculation process. Most of their focus is actually on social capital. And so that's how I leveraged the concept of political economy in the Chinese context, which was most of the government officials are actually interested in gaining social capital through the types of investments and the types of relationships that they develop, rather than the details of the actual tax breaks that they give to the companies who come in. Their most important thing for them is to gain the investment, get the deal, gain social capital from certain people so that they can broaden their own political influence in China. And then finally, the last character I'll talk about is the consultant. And so I use the consultant as a way for people to kind of find out what was actually going on in the game. There's a lot of hidden calculations, and I'll come to the spreadsheet last. And so the consultant, their job is, in the end, they gain victory points when everybody's doing well. When everybody's making money and making investments, that makes the consultant happy. And so what the consultant can do as their special actions is, one key thing is the costs of their transactions are a lot cheaper than everybody else. So through the game, everybody figures out, oh, it's actually a lot better if I give my information to the consultant and then the consultant gives it to the vice mayor of Chengdu or whatever it is. They find out that it's a lot easier to work through the consultant instead of going directly to the mayors and each other themselves. The other thing then is that they know what they can do to find out all the secret information of the game. And so they have 3 special actions that nobody else can do, which is essentially they can come and peek at the spreadsheet and they can find out what's going, theoretically, they can find out and get the answer for everybody on what's actually going on in the game. So the last thing I'll show is the spreadsheet so you can kind of see where that's coming from. And then I'll stop talking and open up to questions. So so this is what every single scene looks like. Is at the end of every scene, the game leader is just putting in the results of all the transactions that everybody set. So you're just waiting for it all to happen. Everyone's negotiating, going back and forth. And then at the end of the round, you say, okay, US General, what did you do? And you record the actions of what they did. And you only fill out the areas of what they actually did. Okay, Autobauer, what did you do? Shanghai Car Company, so on and so forth. And it automatically feeds out into the mayors generally and the consultant, the outcomes, because all of their metrics are largely based on gaining benefits from the companies. So then the game leader sees automatically what are the information requirements of the mayors, which I didn't speak on, but every scene, the mayors have to give information to the Chinese central government. And this is the amount that they have to give. And so every scene of the game, that's revealed to them. And they know what they have to do and what they have to eke out of everybody else in the game in order to make themselves happy and gain their political clout. And so as you go through each scene, the spreadsheet's the same, but it'll just change what the information is required, details on how many cards pop up in the game, and so forth. And so it automatically calculates out, obviously, all the outcomes of the game and everybody's relationship with the Chinese central government, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to like burn through everything for you guys. The last thing I'll show is what it looks like when the consultant peaks. And so the consultant can do different types of research. So in this case, the consultant can look at what is the relationship that everybody has with the Chinese central government. And so there's a special spreadsheet here of what they can do that's revealed to them based on how the game plays out. And then here is, I purposely left this super long and complicated, was, okay, these are actually how people make money. And what I wanted it to do was to overwhelm the consultant. Is inevitably they walk away. I've even had one time, one game was the consultant looked at everything and they walked away and they said, okay, the way you make the Chinese central government happy is you give away all of your IP. That's what the central government likes. And the player's like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And obviously, yes, that's true, but that is not the full truth of how one wins in China. So I'll stop there, and very, very curious to hear what people say, and I hope that was an effective run through so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really great tour. And I have a bunch of questions, a bunch of directions, but I'll let other folks jump in first. If anybody has anything pressing. Let's see. So, let's see. One question I have, which is sort of specific to the format, but in a game that involves a lot of negotiations, a lot of wheeling and dealing, with 6 players, do you have them, is there any scripted way they're talking to each other and interacting, or is it just sort of free for all? You have a certain amount of time to talk to each other and reach possible agreements?
Essentially, free for all is the way that this game was designed. Was each scene has a decreasing amount of time, so I let the first scene be really long to let people wrestle with the concepts and wrestle with the differences that everybody has. So that hopefully by the end of the first scene, people are starting to see like, oh, I see why you're here, and I understand why, like how the game is structured. Is I let them wrestle with the concepts. And so the first scene is particularly always like really ugly and messy. And I just kind of designed it as such, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Throw people in the deep end and they'll figure it out through making actions and seeing the consequences. Totally. Yeah, I mean, I've seen different approaches in these types of games in terms of like, is there more of like a round robin? Let's make sure you get face time with other factions. But every game sort of has its own unique constraints. And also like, I think there's interesting implications of like, there are different skills players can bring to a game in terms of being good at negotiations broadly, and then separate from that is the good at understanding what it takes to win by whatever the game conditions are. But all super interesting. What are some surprising things you've learned in playtesting so far that didn't meet your initial expectations?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a million things. Playtesting is always like the fantastic, beautiful, humbling experience, right? Um, uh, I would say it's always about like, what the thing that always comes back to me is like how I package actions or how I package the different things is ends up being like the most critical thing is just so much miscommunication through the user experience, right? It's like it might be the exact same words, it might be the exact same, concept or token or whatever. It's just where it's situated on the board implies a totally different thing, or uh, uh, how much. Um, the other thing that I'll say is my mood during the explanation, and so that of like when I explain the game is like how tired I am during the game, or when I explain the
Yeah.
game impacts the play, and so that tells me to go back to the explanation deck and make it better because it shouldn't be dependent on my mood.
Yeah, you should be
Um,
totally groggy, and it should still all be conveyed clearly. Yeah.
right, exactly. Those are the two things that I've really noticed is just always have to come back to the user experience design, and then the rule book, rule book, however you want to call it, is just always just so brutally tedious and important for how it's put together.
Yeah. Cool. Very cool. I'll open up. Do other folks have questions they want to ask?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm kind of wondering the how this interfaces with clients. Like, what is the kind of economy around play in the sense of how do you make the time? How are your clients making the time to play this game, and what is their justification kind of internally to do so?
So this game and this, I mean, the actual paying client in this case, just to be clear, is Lux Capital. But the interest for the games is very strong. And so in this game, and part of that is this game in particular is I set a 2 hour timer as soon as I start explaining the game, and that 2 hour timer tells me that the game ends. And so this game, the way that I designed this is it could have 6 scenes, it could have 7 scenes. I default, in the end, it's up to the game leader running the game, the facilitator. But I say this is guaranteed to be a 2.5 hour experience. We will not take any more of your time than 2.5 hours. The game itself will be 2 hours, including the learning, and then we'll have a 30-minute debrief, and then you're out the door. Um, and so that package sounds really good to people when we present it to them. And then from what I've seen from my own, speaking personally, then on my own kind of game development business model, is I've seen kind of three areas of interest. So you have like a broader stakeholder engagement interest is okay. Let's get a lot of different people to sit around the table and understand a topic and build relations with each other through a topic. So they build literally new synapses in the brain around the topic, but also with each other through the topic. So their memories are shared and their relationships are now connected around an idea and a very cool idea usually. The other one is kind of the more dialogue-based, strategic scene setting scenario. So like a C-suite talking through a game and like gaming out very broadly. Okay, what do we think here? What happens here? Okay, let's say that this happens. Let's have a discussion. And you have kind of like the discussion be the judge. There's a lot less calculations. There's a lot less assumptions that you're making. You're letting them be the judges in a way. And then the third way is kind of this corporate modeling, corporate training. Is you build a game for a company and a client who wants lots of people in the company to experience the same thing and get on the same page about a topic. And so that you build the game around that audience. That's if that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know, and I'm very curious to correct myself and answer it more in a better way.
No, absolutely, it does. I think this is a great idea, and I think it just kind of intrigues me how you came to this idea of working with C-suite, because I have heard that C-suite already kind of maybe does this kind of simulative thinking, in a lot of different corporations. At least that's what I've heard anecdotally, but they don't do it in this kind of organized, more sophisticated fashion. And you're bringing that to the table, which is really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean that's definitely part of the goal. In one of the, just from my personal development story, was one of the early signals that I should just start my own firm was a friend of mine at one of the big MBB firms called me and was like, I'm supposed to make a game for a client. Like, what? I have no idea what I'm doing, And he was like, please, for God's sake, like, give me some time. And so I sat down with him and his project lead and charged them a couple hours of time to like just tell them like what a game. I mean, they had no idea. I mean, it was shocking, in that sense of like they were coming from such a low bar that anything was, incredible wisdom. And it was like information arbitrage at its best. And it's like just go buy Catan. You can figure this out by playing like Monopoly, guys. But yeah, so that was that was one of the early signals. It was like, oh wow, there's like real need and curiosity around this space.
Very cool. Question for you, following up on the format. Oftentimes, I feel like the how you approach the debrief and structure it can have a huge impact on what people walk away with. How are you thinking about designing debrief for this game?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I love it, Randy. So first everybody like wants to know the game. I find the debrief has to have like two sections. There needs to be like a game debrief, and then there needs to be a content debrief. Because like everybody's, like they've got so many endorphins pumping through them. They want to know like, what the, how did he win with 18 and I only got 19, or, like by the end of the round, like everyone's very invested in it. And so you kind of have to walk through the game first is what I'm finding, and let them know the mechanics, let them know kind of the struggles and everything. And kind of like let that subside, and then you say, so so that's why that these things are important, and you leverage that to get to the point, is what I would say. And I think it depends on the audience, is what if you want them to wrestle with the outcomes or the takeaways, and then you like come in with your like key takeaway that you really want them to know, or if you do that first and then let them discuss. It depends on the group. But that's what I found, is like just do the game first and then actually talk about the content.
That makes a ton of sense. I've definitely been in that room where people can't talk about anything until they're like, well, what was it going on under the hood? How did the scores get calculated? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Very
exactly.
Cool. I have other questions, but I'll open up for other folks to chime in first if anyone wants to.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. So one quick clarification. This is a competitive game, not cooperative. There's only one winner at the end. And second, I want to hear about the asymmetries between the players and how that influenced the kind of strategies that you designed into the game. Like, what did you think was the right strategy for each player to pursue? And did game participants actually follow your strategy, or did they go off the rails and do something that you did not see coming?
Interesting. So to answer the first part of the question, I'd say the asymmetries, I think, are, in this case at least, are inherent to the model, or to like the scenario that you're modeling. And so like choosing a good scenario, and Lux is very good at that, is like only choosing scenarios that are inherently like, what the bleep is going on here, like who wins, who loses, totally different people sitting around the same table, is kind of the core concept of a Lux Risk game. And so the asymmetry is pretty inherent in that, is like you can't have a politician sitting down with the union president, sitting down with an admiral, and not have it be an asymmetric game, for example in Danny's game on Hampton at the Crossroads. So choose a scenario, I guess, but like if the client is defining the scenario, then that's tough, right? But what I do then is so kind of to answer that question more broadly, then in a less cheap way, is so I draw out like a diagram of extraneous and exogenous, endogenous factors of the game, and really tweak out like what incentivizes the individuals of the game. And so in this case, it was like social capital is understanding it, like a huge part of the asymmetry is the Chinese nationals are interested in the social capital, while the U.S. nationals or foreign nationals are not interested in the social capital, because your social capital is only valuable in the Chinese political economy context. But if you're going to ever leave China, then your social capital is just like swept away, and your ability to use it when you're in country is limited. Da, 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 da. So, so when I drew out the endogenous and exogenous factors around, kind of, I always start with like a map of this sort of stuff, and diagram in, you know, where what's coming in from what direction and so forth. I'm a very like spacious visual thinker. That then tells me, okay, this is what that person's responding to. Then I need to use that as their victory condition, or as their action, or as the differentiator in what their strategy is. Second part of your question, how do they do they take strategies different from what I expected? Mostly it's gone as I expected. Mostly, what's always cool in this cool slash like is like when, you know, just stronger personalities come into play, you know, and so one aspect of the game is there can be a joint venture in the game, and somebody who is the Chinese company pushed through that like both foreign firms should join in a single joint venture with them in the same scene, and it like successfully broke the game in the sense that the Chinese company just like came out way on top, because, you know, inevitably they got a bunch of information leaked to them and so on and so forth. And so like worked out well for the theme of the game, but it was like, oh wow, like come on, you guys, like, you know, like I was like, you know, oh, anyways, there's a quote from Princess Bride, like, you never fight a whatever. You never go into
no land wars in Asia. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you.
When death is on the line.
Exactly. Yeah.
And actually,
you know, it's like,
this is so sorry. As you were saying this, if I could share a comment, this reminded me a lot of playing Fire in the Lake, which is a coin game about the Vietnam War, and the factions are Viet Cong, NVA, America, and South Vietnam. But what's weird is that, okay, well, obviously the alliances are set as they were historically, communists versus anti-communists. What you really want to do, everybody's separate victory conditions, and you really want your ally to do all the heavy lifting so that you can reach your victory condition without having to invest heavily. So like one time I played it with an American. I was South Vietnam, and my American ally just did not care about the victory condition. He's like, yeah, we're going neck deep into Vietnam. We are deploying the entire US Army. And I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. Victory. So there's something where it's like the game breaks if one person just decides to ignore their victory condition. And then, I mean, it's not on you as a designer. It's like, my God, actually follow the rules.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, but is this the variety of like, oh, yikes, yes. Asymmetry is cool, but also hard to balance.
Right. Yeah, and I think, frankly, there's like a beauty of serious games versus like mass market games, is in the end, you know, the serious game is used for learning outcome. And that allows the game to some degree. It's like, it's okay if it breaks, because it usually breaks in the way of like the worst case learning outcome. And so it's like, see, that's why you should never do that, you know. So like, go tell your boss, or, you know, go write that down, that you never give away all of your IP to the Chinese government. Right. Like, versus, you know, in a mass market game, it's like, well, there has to be a way for me to come back, otherwise it's not fun.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Not every faction has to have the same odds of winning. Like, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I often view the same with an eye to replayability too, where you don't need the same amount of chance and randomness involved if people are only going to see the content once. I don't know. Yeah. Are you thinking about randomness in your game that way, or
this game? The way this game played out was there is randomness, but it's all like very limited. It's in like the returns of your investments. It's like, okay, you're supposed to get, you know, 2x. and you're going to actually get somewhere between 1.7 and like 2.3 or something like that. The replay, it's actually, I've had a number of players be like, I would totally play this again, even though I know like the hiddenness, because there's such asymmetry. I've had a number of people be like, I want to play as the mayor now, or I want to play as the consultant. Definitely. And they've thought that it would still be interesting just because of the asymmetry. Yeah, me personally, I'm I love, randomness and probability as a concept, but in games experiences, I'm always like so embittered by them when it's like I had a 90% chance of winning and I got the 10%. Are you bleeping kidding me? So I lean away of designing that way generally. And I'd rather have it be like a system that I was just telling my wife about this. I'd rather have it be like a system that everybody shares and steps into, and but you're bringing a different paradigm into that system. Those are the problems that I find most interesting, and I think that's a way that I think that at least I learned is like once you learn the system that you're operating in, then you can understand how are different people changing the system via their own inputs and their own drivers, factors, whatever word you want to choose.
What would you say? Like, I feel like this particular game is kind of a mashup of kind of a matrix game and something else. But I mean, how would you, like, with a very, as you said, very deep kind of playable systems lens to it? What would you say is kind of the lineage of your thinking around these risk games and how you've ended up where you're at?
Yeah. That's a great question, and this is an interesting thing that Danny would be able to speak to too. Is that's kind of the gap that we've been talking about as Danny developed Risk Games and I stepped into it, was like there seems to be a whole new theory. I mean, there is no single term that anybody agrees on in this whole gaming world. So please be gracious with whatever words that I end up choosing. Is that in the traditional wargaming sense of like military applications, kinetic warfare, like there's oftentimes an extreme concern over the model that it's based on and realism. And so where does the data come from? What are you doing here? And so if it's like this like dichotomous perspective of like either it needs to be a perfect simulation of where the exact distance that missile can fire and like what is the exact probability of a unit attacking this unit, yada yada. Either you need to get it all right, or it needs to be like an RPG matrix game, where like you have real life adjudication and people just making decisions on the fly, and it's all based on people's biases and so forth. And the game ends and everyone's like, I don't really know what happened. So what we're trying to do is you make the assumptions up front, you put them in the model, in the Excel spreadsheet, and those assumptions are very clear, and people are more than welcome to tear them apart and call them BS and whatever it is. Let's just get 80% of the model done and 80% of the concept, and then get the game out there. And so, yes, I think it is similar to matrix games in the sense of that's the traditional model that's the model that traditional war gamers would use in these kind of non-kinetic conflict situations. But I think we add more modeling to it than a traditional matrix game, in order to get it a little bit quicker out there and a bit more accessible. Big goals are accessibility, 80-20 rule, and this asymmetrical perspective on these problems. And so let's just get it out there. Let's get people playing. Let's get people talking about it. And the way we go about it is kind of this Matrix X structure, but then applying, very, frankly, very basic simulation models on top of it.
It sounds like also as a differentiation from Matrix, you're giving the different player roles very concrete choices to make, as opposed to being more open ended,
Yeah.
and that feels like a great way of leveling the playing field for folks who don't have to be an expert in the topic to still being able to very quickly just zoom in and focus on, okay, what are the meaningful differences between my options, as opposed to having to brainstorm like, complete blank canvas.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a requirement generally for the model. So yeah, thank you. That's a great point. Yeah.
Uh, yes, I agree with that. And I actually do have a question about terminology and about your success in using wargaming in sort of a non-military context. Is wargaming a specific term that like gets people on the right page, or is it something where you're like, well, it's what we picked?
Uh, so so I'll speak from my company perspective, CSquared Partners. What I choose gaming simulations, executive experiences.
Mhm.
That's gamification of real life concepts. I use these words. I don't use wargaming with my company per se. I will use it in, that's not, I don't think wargaming is anywhere on my website. Um, uh, because there's so many communities that they see the word war and, they're just like, what on earth? I don't want anything to do with that. I'm not going to war. I sell, X. Um, which is fair and valid. I think it's all fair and valid. It's just, this is the reality of like a kind of a blue ocean industry. Is everybody's trying to figure out like what is reality, what is norm, what is the new standard, whatever it is. And so or nascent industry, maybe not blue ocean. Anyways, so and then for Lux Capital, Riskgaming is what Lux fell on, and it's interesting that nobody's ever chosen it before. What I've heard that are related, I was just at Connections conference last week, 2 weeks ago, at Army War College, and when I was telling people about Riskgaming, they were like, "Oh, so it's kind of like a policy game." Was like the term that a lot of them wanted to use. Nobody was using serious games, which was interesting. Very few. They're like, "Oh, they're," we were at an Army War College, so that there's clearly a culture going on.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, serious war game, serious games. That's very Silicon Valley thing." Was their comment, which was interesting. Just like, okay, sure, maybe. I don't, like I said, like everyone's figuring this stuff out. But risk gaming, I think, is, in my opinion, is a very nifty word, because risk can be security, it can be financial, it can be social, it can, it can be a wide variety of things, and I think it encapsulates all the different asymmetries in the games into a single concept. So people can quickly wrap their brain around it and put their own opinion, paradigm, whatever you want to call it, on top of that word.
Yeah, and like risk management is such a known concept in the business world that hopefully makes it more legible to them, more easier to secure budget or time or whatever they need to do to get people to play.
Yeah.
Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Any
Very
any
much.
other interesting takeaways from Connections, just in general?
Like everything that so it was one of the largest connection conferences that they've had. Uh, like 30% of the attendees were brand new, had never been before. And many said that the topics were the most non-military facing that they'd ever seen. Randy, I mentioned your name a couple of times to a guy, just FYI, about your social media game. A guy was interested about doing a game around what is it like to be there's a term here, but like a disinformationist, a misinformationist, to be like, what are the incentives of being on that side of it?
On the propaganda side, on the manipulation side, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and there was somebody else who was talking about creating a game. This was really interesting, was creating a game for cancer patients to game out the probabilities and try to see in the future of like, what is the long-term experience going to look like for their care? And so like these were very cutting edge concepts at the Connections Work, conference is my point. And so a broader sense of gaming is definitely being tested out and figured out, and the military is wrapping their brains around it as well. And nobody really knows what to call it. Still, like even the war gamers were like, well, it's not really war game, but it's war gaming, And so like this,
yeah,
like any community, there's a whole lot of momentum that's keeping things forward and stuff. So that was one thing. The other thing was that was interesting was the wrestling with digitalization and so forth was even still, like, so Microsoft obviously has the the foot up in anything that's government facing, and so they're trying to figure out how to use Azure to put together all these games on a shared system and so forth, and but like nobody's like nobody trusts it, nobody knows what to do with it. Like it's just fascinating to me. So it's growing, nobody knows what it is, and then like the digitization is real, or the gap in digitization, I should say.
Everyone senses there's possibility there, but nobody's figured out the easy way of integrating it. I for one feel like we're going to see a lot of new design patterns emerge where we figure out, okay, what parts do we offsource into digital space versus physical space. That's all really exciting to hear, though. It sounds like there's room for more convergence between what's happening on the defense wargaming side and everything else, which feels a lot more cohate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, any concepts, opinions, inputs? Obviously you don't know the game. I went through it way too fast, but I'm curious if there's any comments or ideas or inputs that folks have. I'd love to just hear opinions.
I think it's really exciting. If you want to test it with the community, you would very quickly get enough volunteers to run a session, I'm sure. Actually, on that note, I mean, do you think it would be, how easy do you think it would be to run it through Discord or Zoom?
Great question. Because this game's so like there are coins that you're giving out, I think it'd be really tough. That's a great question, though. In general, they're just so tough. So many of these, the heavy negotiation ones, because you have to get on breakout rooms and so forth. It's so tough. But that's a great question. I'm thinking more about that, of like how to design these games to be a bit more accessible. But yeah, that short answer is this one's really tough, I think. The next one that I'm doing with Lux is around essentially water politics in Arizona and the rapid increase of chip fab development in the state and in the Phoenix area. And so I'll be thinking about online testing, Randy, as I build that out.
If you want to geek out on that later, Discord has some interesting affordances, including bots that you can use little shortcut commands, and the bots do things on the back end in terms of presenting consequences or updated state. We've done a little bit of work on that. But I think you're right. That's like, it's one of those things that you need to kind of design for from the beginning. Cause it's really hard to after the fact say, hey, let's pivot and make this more friendly for Discord or Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, let's absolutely geek out on
that. So, my thoughts on that, Tabletop Simulator or like Roll20 are sort of, right, they're the okay platforms. They're not good, but they're okay. And particularly if you don't have like deep mechanics, just like, okay, we have to figure out how to do tokens and pass that around. That's probably doable. I've not actually done anything deep with either, so you know better than I. I'm also wondering about sort of the action space. So one thing which I really did like in the one character card I saw was like, hey, right, you have a quarter. A quarter is always 3 months. You have 3 actions which have costs of 0, 1, and 2 months. But that says that actually, right, there's only 2 types of turns. You can do actions B plus C or action B 3 times. I was just wondering, how many actions do you think is the right number for each players? And do the other characters have a different number of actions they can take or different costs?
So last one first, yes, they had different costs. And so that was to simulate out like the frictions of dealing with different people in the economy. So like it was harder. It cost more time for an American to give information to the Chinese government than the Chinese company. The Chinese company is in Shanghai, so it's easier for them to give information to the Shanghai mayor than the Chengdu mayor, that sort of thing. And then your first part of your question was, what is the right number? Gosh, I don't know if I have an answer to that. I would lean towards like the human, I forget what the research was, but like the human mind can manage like 5 to 8 things, in their head at a time.
7 plus or minus.
Is that, yeah, okay.
That's why phone numbers are 7 digits, allegedly.
There you go. Yeah. So I would default to that as the number that they can do or should do. But in terms of probably the second step to that would be in my thinking would be either, how do you say it? So you change the system so that they're only doing like 2 to 3 things at a time, because then 2 to 3 feels very quick, and so I would change the scenes to be shorter scenes so that they're doing 2 to 3 things per scene, or it's one scene. In this case, it's one scene. You have lots of options, but you can only do 2 to 3 things in this scene. And so part of this game is wrestling with what are the transactions that are best for me. But normally I would lean towards that, is like 6, whatever, 5 to 8 options. You do 2 to 3 just to keep the game going. But this game was that many options or more options, but that's kind of the point of the game, is wrestling with them.
Something that might be interesting to think about. It might be something you're already doing. I couldn't quite tell on the
Please.
on the victory point side and like declaring a winner. I often find that like it's fun to have like the one winner that that everyone's competing for, but also sort of cribbing from the Eurogames scene, having sort of victory point conditions that like. And then having tiers around it, so everybody could, if they play a good game, end up being like, cool, we actually got like an A tier victory condition, enough victory points to be like, great job, whatever. If they've successfully managed that. So, and I think that fits in well with the asymmetry too, where it creates space for positive sum games where collaboration is effective if done intelligently.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think also one thing I've thought about is. So it's not a collaborative game, like one person wins or something, but what you could do is like with that victory point condition is you add up different people's victory points to imply different outcomes.
Yeah. I can see that playing really well with like tight epilogues that give it some narrative closure at the end.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I love that.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to play with it too much. One of our games had that, where every faction had its own little victory point math, and we kind of said, okay, if you get 5 points or more, you've done a good job internal to what you're trying to do. So you're gonna keep your job or get the promotion or whatever it is in the context of the game.
Right.
But then there's still room for whoever got the most victory points. They're the outright winner of the game overall, and we'll maybe tie the epilogue more closely into what they're trying to achieve.
Right. Yeah. But this is a random thought, but this group will I think appreciate, was just yesterday we went to the Smithsonian American History Museum, and there was a little game in one of the rooms, and it was like, okay, American history is very volatile, changes a lot. Okay, choose a person in like 1880s, and you make a choice of like what should they do. So you could be like Mary like Featherhead, and she was a Euro Indian from the Dakotas that traded with fur with a company, and now Chicago has been founded, and you can maybe go to Chicago and trade your furs in Chicago instead of the monopoly that you've been working in. So what should you do? And so there was like various ones of these. You could do these different experiences. It was so disappointing though, because it was like, okay, I'm gonna be Mary Featherhead and I'm gonna go to Chicago. And so you say, I go to Chicago, and it's all a digital screen. And you go to Chicago, and it's like, you went to Chicago. You made trade in Chicago, and you made money.
That's
Like
it.
they're like it was shocking how lacking of a story arc and this kind of feeling of an epilogue, this feeling, this sense of achievement. It was just it was fascinating. It was like they came so close and then they just like
Right, it's clearly a
stopped.
foundation that they could build something powerful on. It's yeah, I love talking about how like experience design. There's a great quote. I think it's from the immersive theater space where it's like the experience starts when you first hear about it and ends when you last remember it. So like the game is a core
Mm,
part of the experience, but keep extending beyond those bounds. It's not just about the mechanics, it's about before and after. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly.
We're coming up on the top of the hour, so if you have anything else you want to share, I mean, you can always share afterwards in the Discord. But I mean, tell people where they can find you online. If you have any asks of the audience, let us know. Um,
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I'm right now primarily on LinkedIn, and my mass market games is very active. That in that endeavor, I partnered with my wife for she's our marketing and go to market strategist. So CSquared Games is who we are on Instagram. If you want to follow us there, we're doing a game on faith and politics in the Iberian Peninsula and the simulation of the next 75 years of geopolitics. And I'm starting to tease the ideation of another game, Politics and Parties, which games out the different incentive structures of different party systems, different multi-party systems. So 2 versus 3 versus 4 versus 5. Like, what does that feel like for people? And yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and would love to connect with people and learn more about what you're all doing as well. I'm thrilled for this opportunity. Thank you so much. And the questions always like feed into how I'm thinking about things. So thank you.
well, thanks so much for coming and sharing. And I know everyone here is keen to play the game at some point, whether playtest or further down the road. So don't hesitate to reach out if we could be of help for you on any dimension. But thanks again.